Yes. Welcome to another great episode of the Ashish and Friends podcast. Today we got something special. The 2020 NFL draft just occurred, and we're going to discuss it, dissect it, talk about our favorite drafts, the Cowboys especially. We're going to dissect that. And today we've got a full house again. I'm your host, as always, Ashish Airy on Instagram and Twitter. We've got Dev at Supaleza. We've got Shahan at Shahan Jayaraja, and we've got Ryan in the house. Okay, and you can always catch us, what's going on, at AshishandFriends.com. We put up our polls on Ashish and Friends on Instagram, Ashish and Pals on Twitter, and you can hit us up on too now, Facebook.com/Ashish and Friends Pod. So hit us up there. Please like, subscribe, share, get on YouTube. We appreciate it so much. Anyways, without further ado, we actually have a special guest right here. Shahan in-house is like probably the smartest person of all time with college football. I personally haven't kept up with it ever in my life, but Shahan's been dedicated to this. This is his job, okay? You can hit him up individually too. If you have any questions, he knows the answers. So we're really blessed to have him here. And without further ado, let's talk about the draft real quick. So this year, with the whole coronavirus COVID-19 thing going on, the players couldn't meet up with the commissioner in person. It's supposed to happen in Las Vegas, which has now been postponed to 2022. And so what do you guys think? I just want to get your thoughts about like how the whole setup was, if anything stood out with the cameras and stuff. So Dev, you want to start?
Yeah, I actually like if ESPN had done a better job of like covering it, I actually think it was better a TV product than like the normal draft because like obviously I think ESPN, like we all know, they had their problems with like they were just showing way too much stuff that like was really deep and personal that like we don't really like. I didn't really want to hear about the tragedies of every single player and what they had to go through. Obviously, it's heartbreaking and like it just didn't make a good TV product to me. So like, but ESPN, like seeing the reactions live, like from their houses and like the fans, and it honestly worked well to me. I liked it.
Yeah. What about you, Sean? What stuck out to you?
Yeah, I actually think that this was one of the more entertaining drafts that we've seen. Like, I think that Dev's right. I think it was actually more interesting and more fun to watch than a lot of the ones that we get before. The only thing that you kind of miss is, like, having the podium for players to go up to and get drafted. That was, like, the one thing that kind of sucked. But, other than that, I mean, it's funny. I watched the WNBA draft the week before, and I think that they were kind of working through some of the kinks with that. And I think that they realized, like, trying to do live interviews was just going to be a really difficult thing to do, with the players. And so I think that they handled that well. I actually thought that Daniel Jeremiah was a great addition to the set. I thought that he was the best analyst of the day. I mean, it's funny, right? Like, Mel Kiper's the guy that we grew up watching, but, like, he's not what he used to be in a lot of ways. So I think that adding Jeremiah to the set, Louis Riddick did a good job, and I'd be excited to see Todd McShay back in that mix. I thought that it was a really great production. Like Deb said, we didn't have to have like a sob story for every single player. Like the one that really stood out to me was the Jordan Love one with Green Bay when they have an interview with him and then they're like, by the way, his dad committed suicide and it was probably his medication. Like, what are we doing here, right? Like, at a certain point, this isn't like fun. This is exploitative. Like, this isn't like making us feel more for him. Like, you're just finding things to try to make people feel bad, right? Yeah. But overall, I think they did a really good job, and I really liked, like you guys said, having some of the families involved, having obviously cameras into both the GMs and the players. I thought that worked really, really well.
Yeah, to add on just a little bit to what you were saying, I really liked just like the whole way they managed flipping between the analysts was like done really well compared to like normally they're at the desk and it's a little awkward sometimes, like, but they basically had a moderator, like the way it worked.
Right.
And
I think that works.
Did anything stick out to you, Ryan?
I didn't actually watch any of the NFL draft, but shout out to the New England Patriots drafting. They used a dog. It was a very cute dog. I appreciated that. And then also, I saw Cliff Kingsbury. They made a Lego statue out of his drafting. That was pretty cool. But other than that, I don't know how the whole thing.
Did you see Jerry Jones's setup?
Oh yeah, he was in the yacht.
Yeah, in the yacht.
And he had some helpers hold his phone for him.
He had like Charlotte holding the phone for him too. I was just like, damn. But I don't know what happened with Jerry on the yacht, but whatever it was fucking fantastic. So
I'm
thank
pretty
you.
sure what happened was that they took Jerry Jones, put him on a yacht, and didn't actually give him internet access, and that's what happened.
Yeah, he was not involved at all. But whatever happened, that was amazing.
Don't call me.
I think, like Shahan mentioned, the cool thing was that the ESPN and NFL Network kind of merged, and so they had some really good analysts going on. Like Ryan mentioned, I think Cliff Kingsbury's whole place was like huge deal on the first day. People were really surprised with that, and I think I hate it, but Commissioner Goodell was kind of like humanized during this process. Like that first day, he's super excited. Then you hit rounds 2 and 3 in day 2, and he's just like dead. He's like, okay, I'm gonna sit on the chair. I don't know who's getting paid. He starts slurring his words. People are like, what's going on, man? I think it's cool that they had the fans in the background on the Zoom or whatever. You get some really cool celebs pop up there too. I like the booing that they added too. That's cool. Okay. Did anything pop out to you draft wise? Like, was there any picks you're like, wow, that was like the best pick of all time, or why the hell did they even do that? Yeah, what's up, Brian?
I think the best pick of the draft was Devin Duvernay for Baltimore Ravens. I think that was a huge need. They didn't have a slot receiver. They had just two streaky receivers on the sides with Snead and Brown and tight ends. I think Duvernay is incredibly beautiful fit for that team. I think he works perfectly in the slot. He gives Lamar Jackson that option. He's strong. He's fast. He can even run long routes if you want him to. I think it was a steal for them. And
Yeah.
on the flip side,
yeah,
I thought Colin Johnson was a good pickup by Jags late. I thought he was going to go a lot earlier. He's like a Calvin Johnson prototype.
Okay,
Look
no.
aboard.
Just gonna jump in and say no. He is not a Colin Johnson prototype.
For anyone that doesn't know, Ryan went to UT, so obviously, as you can tell now. Okay, what about you, Dev? Anything like you're really surprised with, good or bad?
Honestly, I was like obviously as a Cowboys fan, I'm probably gonna focus on them a little bit, but I was actually really surprised they picked CeeDee Lamb because like they don't always do like the best available picks. Like a lot of times they just pick for need. I just thought it was a phenomenal pick. Like, hey, we don't really have a desperate need at wide receiver, but it makes our offense that much more versatile. And he's just the best player. We don't want to reach to get Diggs, and then they got Diggs anyway. So like that was just good drafting to me.
Yeah, I think compared to prior years, this is like the first year where they actually chose like probably the top person on their board, which, like you said, they usually choose like what they need. But like this time, they actually let it fall to them. And we'll discuss a little bit more with the Cowboys and go in depth with all their picks. But I was very impressed with that. Like you mentioned,
and it takes them away from the Eagles, so it's like a 2-for-1.
Right. Yeah. No, the Eagles were definitely rumored to try to move up to try to get Judy or Lamb. So that was awesome that they got Lamb to the Dallas. But yeah, I was just surprised. I'm not sure if that would happen if Jason Garrett and Rod Marinelli were still here, because I know in the past they have tried to like get Garrett guys, like people that are really good and good personalities, and Rod really loved his like defensive tackle. Like Tristan Hill last year, that was a shitty pick and hasn't turned out to anything. And Rod spent his birthday with him last year, like, yo, I love this guy, let's get him. So really fucked up there. So I'm kind of glad. I don't know what happened, like I said, but I loved it.
Yeah.
I also like the other big surprise is that Judy or Lamb didn't go first as a receiver. Like that was like the whole thing that was talked about. It's like either Judy or Lamb. You're either Judy or Lamb guy, and then neither of them were the first receiver taken.
Yeah, and I'll say, and we can actually start with the Cowboys right after this, but for me, looking at those receivers, right, like this was an all-time receiver draft. This might have been the best receiver draft ever. I think we might seriously look back and say that. And here's the deal, right? With Judy and Lamb, like you're getting that sort of big play, you're getting that sort of downfield sort of threat. Ruggs was a really good player in college, right? Like a really, really good player in college. I think that he is the biggest beneficiary of having a guy like Tyreek Hill all of a sudden come out, break out, just be that guy who runs far, right? Just be that guy who can separate. And, another guy who's like that is Marquise Brown with the Baltimore Ravens. Having those sorts of guys succeed, I think really benefited Henry Ruggs. Now, the big question is, can Derek Carr actually get the ball to his feet. That's really the bigger question to me.
Or Mariota.
Right. And I personally would not have taken Ruggs first, obviously, but I think that it is kind of nice that it fits into that whole Oakland mind, or I guess not Las Vegas mindset of just draft the fastest player available.
Well, and it could work for them because, like you were talking about with Marquise Brown, like the Ravens' offense is better when he's there, whether or not he's catching the ball. Like the offense is just better because he's pulling people, right? Like it's just the way it works because of his speed. So,
I mean, I think Ruggs was definitely top 3, but just not expected to be the first one off the board. And I guess when you're playing Tyreek Hill twice a year, every time, you just want that fast guy. So let's talk about the Cowboys draft, which I think a lot of analysts said was one of the best drafts, and I have to agree with that as a Cowboys fan. Like for sure, it blew my mind how good it was. So I think with the first pick, we have CeeDee Lamb, who like is so amazing after the catch. Like I think he only had 62 receptions and over 1,200 yards, which is freaking crazy. I think in college he played only like 30% of the snaps in the slot and 70 on the outside. Whereas I think with the Cowboys, he'll be playing a lot of the slot with Amari and Gallup on the outsides, which is, I think, really amazing. Because one of his weaknesses, people were saying, was like he didn't get that coverage and they're worried about the press coverage with him. So I think working out of the slot will be freaking fantastic.
Yeah. And I'll go ahead and jump in. So, I mean, starting with CeeDee Lamb, like you mentioned, Lamb is a guy who I got to see, I think, 5 times last year play live. And the thing that jumps out is just like you said, I mean, his ability after the catch. You're talking about a guy who, could not be tackled at first contact. Like, that's just what teams struggled to do against him. And the funny thing to me, right, was that Oklahoma is an interesting offense because Oklahoma is so good at spreading their playmakers out, getting them the ball in space. And that was actually something I was a little curious about with CeeDee Lamb potentially going to a situation where he's asked to be the number 1 guy is, when he is being manned up, when he's being bracketed, when he has to play through physical coverage, will he do that as effectively as he is when he can get the ball in space? I wasn't sure about that. Going to the Cowboys now, you pair him up with an Amari Cooper who's going to take a lot of that physical contact. I think this is a really great fit for him to be able to step in right away and not have to deal with some of that very physical coverage. And not that he couldn't do it, not that he couldn't go high and get the ball. Like, he can do that stuff. He's just maybe not as good as some of the other guys in this draft at doing this. So I think that being able to get him in space, being able to get him in the slot a whole lot, I think it's going to be an absolutely perfect fit.
Yeah, I think unless you're like a just mega superstar, like a Julio Jones or something, the receiving core is just better when you have like more receivers. Like the more good receivers, everyone gets better. Like the more good receivers you throw at the problem. Like I think Cooper is now a better player because CeeDee Lamb is next to him, and vice versa.
Yeah, and you saw last year, obviously, when Amari Cooper gets into the lineup, how much better a player Dak looks like, right? Like, I mean, just when you have a guy who obviously is a matchup nightmare, and now you mix him with another guy who's more of that speed threat compared to the Cooper, who's the route runner, who's the more big physical target. Again, I think that they're just a fantastic fit next to each other.
Yeah, and for everyone watching, you saw Ryan nodding his head in disagreement. It's not because he disagrees with the facts. His Longhorns just got destroyed by the Sooners in the Red River Showdown, so he's upset about it. What's up, Ryan? You don't need to wave your hand, dude. Just talk.
I was waving my head because I have first-hand experience of seeing CeeDee Lamb destroy the coverage of my very own Longhorns, and it's very discouraging. So I know he can do it. I know he's very talented, and I think it's actually a need for the Cowboys. It's not their top need, but I think they needed another receiver because they didn't have anybody else after Cooper and Gallup. They lost like everybody else. So I think that's actually a need. Not the top need, but a need they need to fill eventually.
Yeah,
right.
And the big question for me right now is, can he be a more consistent receiver? Because like you mentioned, I mean, he wasn't the sort of guy who, like another guy who we're going to maybe talk about later, James Prochet, is a guy who was just a monster at catching passes, right? Like always open, always contested catches. Like CeeDee Lamb was more of sort of the home run, right? 58 catches isn't a whole lot for a guy who played in as many games as he did, but he makes the most of every catch. So now can he step in and be a guy who can catch 90 balls in a season? Can he do that? I think he can, but we have to see it now.
Right, and I think like going into the draft, there's a lot of talk about the Cowboys looking at that secondary and trying to fix that because there's a lot of safeties and corners in that area. And just surprisingly, like no one thought about Lamb dropping this far to 17. And like Dev mentioned, they did take the best player available, which is really shocking, and I love it. And like you have to consider, like even Gallup, I think I'm not sure if he hit over 1,000 yards last year. It must have been like 900 at least, though. So like having that kind of combination of weapons for Dak is just fantastic. And you got Blake Jarwin, Zeke, Pollard, a lot of playmakers. It'll be very fun offense to watch. So talking about the defense, like one of the names that were attached to the Cowboys was Trayvon Diggs out of Alabama. And they got him in the second round with the 51st pick overall, which was freaking fantastic. Like I really didn't expect him to be there. There's quite a few names that dropped, I think, in that area. But yeah, if you want to give us a little detail about him, Shahan, go right ahead.
Well, Trayvon Diggs is an interesting prospect because I think that he's somebody whose reputation in college didn't necessarily live up to his performance. Like, he was talked about as somebody who was a little bit inconsistent, as a guy who sometimes gave up big plays because he gave up big plays against specifically LSU, right? And you know who gave up big plays against LSU was freaking everybody. And so,
not Texas. They were the closest one to beating LSU.
Yeah, they scored 45
in the national championship.
They scored 45 points against Texas. They still gave up big plays.
Well, yeah, Texas held them in check for a little bit, but you know,
Colin Johnson was on that team.
Playing offense, to be clear. But anyway, you know, when you're talking about a guy who's giving up big plays to LSU, that was just something that happened, right? Like AJ Terrell is another guy who was drafted by Atlanta in the first round, who everybody was like, I don't know. Last time I saw him, he was having issues. Well, everybody had issues against LSU. That's just what happened, right? So Trayvon Diggs, great size for a corner at 6'1", 205. Somebody who really has the ability to man guys up, somebody who's a really physical corner. And again, I think that it's nice that he's going to be stepping into a situation where he's not going to be expected to be the number one corner right away, where he's not going to necessarily have to be, manning up on Julio Jones week one necessarily. He's a guy who's going to fit well into that rotation instead, I think. And again, to get him here is an absolute steal. He is a guy who definitely could have gone first round, I think, based on fit. I mean, this was a pretty good defensive back draft, and actually a lot of those guys, like you mentioned, ended up dropping a little bit because of all the value across the board. I think that to get him at that second pick is an absolute steal.
Yeah.
So speaking of the Cowboys corners, like the Cowboys corner room is like really interesting actually, because they have a lot now, because they drafted another corner right later. So now they have a lot. They probably have like they don't have like really the best number one in their corner, maybe number two, but like they have like a lot of number three corners. Like, so it's like they're a really interesting corner room. Like,
yeah. I mean, like coming into the draft, like cornerback was a huge need because if you look at the roster right now, you've got Anthony Brown, who had like an amazing rookie season and has kind of dropped. We signed him to extension for 3 more years. And that's like the only cornerback we have long term. Chidobe Awuzie is going to be a free agent at the end of the year. And so is Jordan Lewis. Lewis hasn't had that much playing time. When he has played, he got some nice picks. So, I think like cornerback was a huge need here. And Trayvon Diggs, for our NFL fans, he's the brother of Stephon Diggs, the new Bills receiver, formerly the Vikings. Interesting note is like he's only played cornerback for 2-3 years. He used to be a wide receiver.
Yeah.
And I think what you got to work with here is like a guy with a lot of talent. He's just raw since he hasn't played that position for too long. So like you said, Shahan, he's not expected to be like the number one corner coming in.
Right.
He'll just have some plays each game or so. But I think after like year one, from like years 2 to 4, you're going to see a lot of progress and be happy with it.
And the thing is too, right, is like you mentioned, only playing corner for a short amount of time after playing receiver. And the other thing too is that he's played other positions in the secondary, right? Like if I remember right, he played some safety too. So he's somebody who you could see obviously play a lot at corner, somebody who could play a little bit at safety, play a little bit at nickel. I think that he's just a really versatile player. And like you said, he's going to keep getting better.
And maybe we'll see him match up against his brother in the Super Bowl.
Hopefully, right?
They have 2 Alabama players right next to each other with Clinton Dix and Trayvon Diggs. They're both from Alabama.
That's true. A lot of people hate Clinton Dix. He was drafted in the first round with the Packers, but I think
he was
like
very good with the Bears. He's a good player.
Yeah, I think he's at least a nice stopgap for the 1-year contract he has. Okay, so in the third round, they took defensive tackle Neville Gallimore. There's actually quite a few picks. I really thought they would go with Burgess, the safety, right there, because it's a huge need for them. But he's from Oklahoma as well, so we got 2 Sooners right there on the board. You had Malik Collins and Antoine Woods, both free agents. Malik Collins went to the Raiders. I think Antoine Woods is still a free agent. So there is a big need, and I think he's like a pretty decent filler. We'll see what he becomes. If you have any more intel on him, because I know you
Yeah.
watched Oklahoma.
Oh, yeah.
So
I'm a big Neville Gallimore fan. And so the deal with him, right, was that his first couple of years on campus, he didn't play a whole lot, and he played in a bad scheme, right? So they played Oklahoma at first, had a defense coordinator named Mike Stoops, who was Bob Stoops' brother. Not the greatest coordinator for today's game. They switched this year to Alex Grinch, and you actually saw Neville Gallimore really start to actually take over games. Like, you saw him dominate Texas. Like, Neville Gallimore is the reason that they beat Texas. In fact, if you talk about Texas offensive center Zach Shackelford, he's really the reason that Zach Shackelford went undrafted. Him and Bravion Roy from Baylor. They both dominated Zach Shackelford. So, and you saw the same thing sort of happen against Baylor in both matchups, but especially in the Big 12 championship game. He was really able to impose his will. You look at that Oklahoma defense, and you're really looking at Kenneth Murray, who obviously was a first-round pick. You're looking at Neville Gallimore, and you're looking at a couple of those defensive backs like Parnell Motley. And those were the guys who really, really dominated for that Oklahoma defense. So he's still a little bit of a developmental prospect. He's not as consistent. And the other thing, too, is that his tape from the first couple of years of his career does not match this past year. But I think that he's taken that step, and I think if he's utilized correctly, he can be a really effective NFL player.
Shahan,
And I think
be a little nicer to Texas, please. You have some fans sitting
Just
here
wait for
listening.
Just wait for us to talk about Duvernay, and then I'll be nicer.
And I think another thing is that, like, right now they already signed Gerald McCoy, who's I think a beast, and Dontari Poe. So they've got some people already there. So he's not expected to step in right
He's gonna
now.
learn a lot from Gerald McCoy.
Yeah. So like, it's not like they needed him like right now to step in. So he'll have some time to develop. I'm interested to see. I saw some footage. I didn't know too much, but I like the pick right there. They definitely need help on that D line. In the fourth round, they took Reggie Robinson II out of Tulsa, the cornerback. So like you said, cornerback was a huge need. They don't have too many on the roster. Unfortunately, I don't know too much about him. I heard this was like the right time to take him, though. With a lot of these picks that Cowboys took, like they either took him exactly where people wanted him, or a little. People were surprised they dropped. A lot of people had like Cowboys having 5 of the top 100 players on their board. So that's something really
rare. Yeah.
Yeah, and so the big deal with Robinson, who by the way is the pride of Cleburne, Texas, is that he is a speedster, right? Like he is very fast, very big for and he has great speed for his size especially. So he's a little bit more of a developmental prospect because Tulsa didn't coach him up all that well, but he's somebody who in a couple years could really contribute.
Yeah, and I mean, they have a great secondary coach, Al Harris, who will definitely help them up a bunch. And I heard Reggie Robinson has made some decent plays, like making picks or whatnot, so I'm excited to see that in the future. And then we got into the 5th round. We traded up, actually, for this pick. We got Tyler, I don't want to mention his last name.
Yeah. I think it's Biadaz, but I'm not totally positive either. But in college football, the past couple of years, he's been regarded as perhaps one of the best centers in the country. Like he was the anchor of that Wisconsin offensive line, which is always elite. And he's somebody who, again, I'm not actually totally sure why he slipped. It might be some physical stuff, but I mean, he's the sort of guy who you expect would be able to step in and be a contributor on the line right away.
Right. So he's a center from Wisconsin. So we were like, oh, Travis Frederick, they're just replacing another Wisconsin center. I think the issue with him, it was like last year he was like phenomenal. And this year he dealt with some injuries or whatnot. At the same time, he's not stepping in, like we said. Like this is a 5th round pick here. So
right.
what they're expecting, I think, is for 1 year, just like get some backup reps, get healthy, and then in the future we'll see. But he'll be like contending for like the 2nd center spot and maybe do some work. So yeah, I really enjoyed the pick. They definitely needed some offensive line with that Frederick news dropping. But yeah, I've heard some really good things about him. Some people had him in the top 100 as well, and they got him at pick 146.
He was like an All-America caliber player at Wisconsin.
It's just like it's also just like never a bad idea to shore up your line, right? Like your offensive line is just always like you can always get it better. So like
right, for sure. Like I mean, you always need those swing tackles. I mean, guards. You never know like if someone's gonna be a guard or tackle. Depends on their like arm length too. Sometimes when they're coming out of the draft. The other thing was Shahan. Who was the Wisconsin running back?
From this season?
Yeah, I think he got drafted this year, maybe. But like, I know, like,
Jonathan Taylor. Yeah.
Yeah. So the past few years, like, he's been like one of the top running backs of all time. So I think that really helped his Tyler's value right here.
Yeah, he. In fact, Jonathan Taylor might have broken the all-time rushing record if he had come back for one more year.
Right. So okay, and that was a 5th round pick we moved up for. I think we gave a 6th, our 5th, and like a next year's 5th. So not a huge deal because the Cowboys are getting compensatory picks for next year, quite a few. So not a huge deal. They ended with the last pick of the 5th round, pick 179. They got Bradley Anae, and he's a stud from Utah. He's a defensive edge. I'm surprised he was actually there at the time. One cool fact, I think, like he was from the Pac-12, right? Is that correct?
Yeah. He played at Utah, and actually, again, this is another guy who you were talking about as a a first-team All-American, one of the best players in the entire country last year in college football. 14 tackles for loss, 13 sacks. Like, he is a big-time contributor. He's somebody who was able to really dominate against really, really good teams, and I was pretty shocked to see that he was still here this late. And I think that actually that was pretty consistent across the board, that people were shocked that he was still there. I mean, he is potentially a big time pass rusher.
Yeah, for sure. I think the reason he dropped was because his measurables weren't great. Like arm length is a little short or something like that. It's really stupid stuff.
He had a bad 40 time, I know. But I'm really just not that concerned about it. He's a really good player.
Well, didn't the Cowboys the number 3 pick, Gallimore, didn't he have like an absurd 40 time for his size?
I think he was like at a 4.9 or something like that, right?
I think it was like 4.79 is what it was.
Yeah.
It was
that sounds about right.
Yeah, it was like an absurd time for his size.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at his size, he's just a huge ass dude. So it was surprising for sure that his speed was so good. I think another thing that I was mentioning with the Pac-12 is that like that's one of the conferences that they have the offensive linemen choose who the best defensive lineman is on the other teams, and he won this past year. Yeah. So like that's a very great sign for us, and that's something I was really excited about.
Yeah, and he's going up against a couple of guys who are going to be first-round picks potentially next year. Like Penny Sewell from Oregon was one who could have been the number 1 tackle taken this year. He went against Walker Little, who's another guy from Texas who's actually who's at Stanford now, another guy who could be a first-round pick. So I mean, he's battle-tested. Like the Pac-12 doesn't necessarily always have the greatest lineman, but this was a pretty good lineman year, and he dominated.
Yeah, for sure. And to round out the Cowboys draft, they took Ben DiNucci, the quarterback from James Madison. Honestly, I have no intel on this guy. I heard he's like pretty decent. I mean, in the 7th round, what you want to do is just like you're gonna fight for those undrafted free agents. So you just kind of want to take someone that you don't have to fight for.
There's really not a bad 7th round pick, right?
Like, no, I mean, yeah. It's just so I was talking about this. Like, I think ideally you want to be an undrafted free agent, dude. You get to choose who your team is at that point. You don't want to be stuck with someone. But so, all right, Shahan, give us some intel on him.
Yeah. Okay. So you're talking about a guy coming in from James Madison University, and so James Madison, for people who don't know, they're like the consensus number 2 team in FCS, right? It's North Dakota State who dominates everybody, and then it's James Madison who dominates everybody on the East Coast. And so he came in was a transfer from Pitt, so he did play at that high level, but he came down to the FCS level and absolutely dominated. He completed 71% of his passes. He's got a great 6'3" frame. Like, the thing is, he's a developmental quarterback, right? Like, he wasn't a very good quarterback at Pitt, which is why he moved down. But, Pitt isn't the easiest place to be a good quarterback either. So you're talking about a guy who's very accurate, who's got a decent arm, not somebody who's very refined, not somebody who's very polished. But the whole idea behind picking a quarterback with this pick is just to, first of all, get potentially a second-round quarter or a second-string quarterback or trade chip. You're not trying to have him take over for Dak Prescott, but he's somebody who, again, has won at the highest level, played in an FCS national championship game, and had success really every single snap on the field at James Madison. So the big question is going to be, what can this staff get out of him? The whole idea is that they're good at developing quarterbacks. That's the idea. We'll see whether it's true in practice. But I mean, look, when you're going for a 7th round pick, you might as well take your shot at your guy.
So what's interesting then is like, how do you think he compares, like, since Carson Wentz also came from the FCS, right? He was at NDSU. How do you think those two compare? Obviously, Carson Wentz is the number 2 pick in the draft, and we're talking about basically the last pick in the draft. So
yeah. And so Wentz played for, like I mentioned, I mean, the most successful program in FCS, right? Like he was
They
a
won
guy.
4 straight championships, right?
Yeah, they've won like 7 of 9, I think. It's insane. Like they basically have ruined FCS football for everybody. They've been that good. But I mean, I think that there are a lot of favorable stuff about it. Now, I think that Wentz was always a little bit more athletic, a little bit more of a playmaker than what DiNucci was at James Madison. And again, I mean, we did see DiNucci kind of struggle playing at a Power 5 school at Pitt. So I mean, we do have a little bit more negative tape on him. But Wentz, I think, coming out, had a lot of these same questions that DiNucci did about level of competition, about whether, he could anticipate stuff like that. And he's obviously answered those questions really well with Doug Peterson. And that's the thing too, right? Quarterback is all about fit. And I do think that obviously the Cowboys and Mike McCarthy are an organization that have put quarterbacks in good positions before. Again, I mean, there are a lot of things that Carson Wentz can do that Ben DiNucci obviously cannot do. But to take a chance on a guy and bet that maybe playing well against good competition or against lower level competition can potentially translate to success at the top level, I think that's a gamble that you make every day.
Yeah, for sure. Good point. Like you said, you're just trying to see what you can get right there, and hopefully he can become the second string backup. I don't know what's the name of their backup right now. It's
Cooper
just
Rush.
Cooper Rush,
and he's really good. He doesn't get a chance to show. I think
yeah.
he has talent.
He's pretty decent in the preseason. I mean, whatever that tells you. But yeah, I just don't feel comfortable. I just want to keep bringing in. I think they brought like Mike White last year or 2 years ago. I mean, you're just trying to take a shot and see what you can get right there. So not a bad draft. I really love this draft overall. Really surprised with some of the names that dropped to us at the positions. Ryan, what did you think about it? Did they fill like all the needs, or was there something like they didn't take, or were you surprised that they took?
I think the biggest glaring need that wasn't addressed was the safety position. I think they really needed a safety because they have HaHa Diggs and Jeff Heath is still there.
No, Jeff Heath went to the Raiders, so they have Xavier Woods starting at safety.
Yeah, so they need some depth in the safety position. And as I mentioned, the kicker, we got a kicker, so that's solved. And I predict we might sign Des Bryant. So I think overall, I think we got some good depth in other spots. I mean, fill those defensive tackle and end needs. So I think we're in the safety, though. We need to address that one way or another. The Cowboys have to address their safety. Because maybe they move on the corners to safety. I don't know.
And I think that both of them have enough size, too, to be able to move to safety if they really wanted to try.
Yeah, actually, so I think... Go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, I was actually saying, I actually don't think the Cowboys are going to sign Dez now that they got CeeDee Lamb. Like, doesn't seem much reason to anymore.
I don't think they ever should have considered it, honestly. It's just...
Yeah, well, if you were going to run him as a wide receiver 3, but...
I mean, like, I know lately this offseason, Dak's been working with Dez. Dez looks pretty decent. I mean, there's still potential, I think, if Dez was willing to, like, have, like, the minimum, prove-it deal, and he's willing to be the third, fourth, fifth receiver. Like, I think that's really tough on someone with, like, someone that much passion. I think it's really hard. But, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if we'll sign Dez, but I'd love him here. Throw up the X. Woo! All right. Anyways, just real quick, I think just... overall, the Cowboys had an amazing draft. The CeeDee Lamb pick still blows my mind. I really thought they were going to go with someone on the defense side, secondary, or maybe one of the Kinlaw or Chason. But then the Falcons did take AJ Terrell, which is a decent pick, but I was just really surprised by that. So I think in the first 16 picks, there were some wow, okay, so some good names are sliding to us. But amazing draft by the Cowboys. Were there any other teams that you're like, whoa, this is like one of the best drafts of all time? Because I think overall, watching this draft, there weren't too many shockers or like, why the hell did they choose him? I was really satisfied with a lot of the teams, what they did. But Shahan, I know we agree on this so much, but who had the best draft in this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are a lot of teams that had really good drafts, of course, but my favorite draft by far has to be the Baltimore Ravens. I mean, I think that they just kept taking players over and over and over again who I was shocked were still on the board. So, the first pick, right? Like Patrick Queen dropping all the way down there, right? He's a guy who's very raw in my opinion, but has shown the ability with his strength and speed to be able to both play in coverage and play linebacker at the line of scrimmage. I mean, he's somebody who was a big contributor on that team. Wasn't even necessarily supposed to come out this year, but LC wins the title, and they're like, why not? J.K. Dobbins with their second pick. J.K. Dobbins was arguably the best player on that Ohio State offense last year. Once he went down in the college football playoff, that offense was not the same. So he's going to be another guy who steps in right away and contributes. And then they just went with the run of players from the state of Texas. So Dobbins is from the state of Texas, Justin Matabuke from Texas A&M, Devin Duvernay, who I'm a big fan of, from Texas. My favorite player that they got was in the 6th round, and this is just because he's a guy who I covered a lot, but also because I think that his tape is tremendous. James Prochet from SMU. He had over 100 catches last year. I think he had 200 catches over the last 2 seasons and 27 touchdowns. Like, this is somebody who gets open at will and does not drop the ball. And that's the best thing that you can say about both Prochet and Duvernay, is that I think that they had like a combined 12 drops in their entire career. Like, it is absolutely insane. They do not drop passes that are catchable. And look, Lamar Jackson's still obviously, a good, not great passer right now, but somebody who obviously can get the ball to you. And if you can make plays with the ball, you can be a really elite player. I think that adding Devin Duvernay and James Prochet to the mix on offense, 2 guys who are never, ever, ever going to drop the ball, those are just huge additions for Baltimore. You're adding, players at this point who I think will both make the roster, both play a whole lot right away. And then, again, you look at the defensive side of the ball. I mean, Justin Matabuke, another guy from Texas A&M who really had a lot of strengths last year, really came along as a player. Geno Stone, a guy from Iowa who I did not expect to be there as late as he was. I mean, just across the board, every single player on their board I was a fan of, and I think that they're going to the best team in the NFL just got better. Let's put it that way.
Right. No, I think that's one thing, like year to year, the Ravens have amazing drafts. And this year was like amazing. They had a lot of picks in the 3rd round, I think 3, and they're all hits. And overall, like you said, all these players, you've got Stone, who I thought really, like after Burgess in the 3rd round, was probably the best safety on the board. They got him really late. J.K. Dobbins was like the 4th or 5th running back taken. And I was like, what the hell? He's like probably the best one. And you got him paired up with Mark Ingram right now. That's amazing. Like Ryan mentioned earlier, the receivers were severely lacking. You had Boykin, you had Brown, and then you had Snead. You had DeAnthony Thomas from the Chiefs too, but whatever. So they missed out on Denzel Mims. They really wanted him, I think, when they had the chance, but someone right ahead of them, the Jets, took him. So they moved back, got some more picks, and like you said, James from SMU, Prochet, what a stud. He had over 100 catches this past year. I'm surprised he slipped that far. That was a steal. And when you look at Queen, the last 2 linebackers they took in the 1st round were Ray Lewis, Hall of Famer, and CJ Mosley, who's a really big stud, who's with the Jets now. Matabuke, I really wanted on the Cowboys too. Very interesting name. And when you just look at it, yeah, they got some good receiving options for the Ravens, for Lamar Jackson. Duvernay and Prochet are just like really studs and really great values that they got. Yeah. So overall, amazing drafts for sure.
Yeah, and for example, I mean, just to kind of put in context all this for you, right? Like with SMU, they had another receiver named Reggie Robertson who's going to be an NFL draft pick next year. He goes down against Houston. The next 2 games, James Prochet has 27 catches for 149 yards and then 167 yards, 3 combined touchdowns. It is absolutely insane. He is a ridiculous player, and I cannot wait to see what he does at the next level.
I want to say for the record, the quarterback of SMU was Shane Buechele, who was originally with the University of Texas Longhorn football team organization. Shane Buechele was on there, so I just want to give credit to the quarterback of SMU as well. The University of Texas Austin.
Okay, real quick, before we talk about some of the other picks that went in the 1st round and overall teams, Dev, you want to talk about Jalen Hurts going to our rivals, the Philly Eagles, right here. What did you think about that pick? I think that's one of the ones a lot of people were really shocked about.
I'm actually an Oklahoma fan, if people didn't know, but I'm not as crazy a college football fan as Ryan is, so like I'm not that particular. But I watch a lot of Jalen Hurts because I watched every OU game last year. And I really like Jalen Hurts. I think he is a good, I just think he's not going to, be a starting quarterback right away. That. But I think he has decent, overall. And Carson Wentz gets hurt. So he's just a good backup, and he could develop into something. Who knows? And they can use him other ways, too. It's not, you don't just have to use your quarterback just as a backup quarterback and never play them.
That's true. I mean, I think right after they're like, oh, the Eagles are going to have like a 2 quarterback system because everyone was shitting on that pick. Because when you look at it, I think Jalen Hurts was like a 3rd round talent. He has great leadership. He did some really good things, but I don't know. I think the Eagles definitely had bigger holes to fill. So a lot of people were upset with that. Like we said, we got CeeDee Lamb. They wanted Lamb or Judy and ended up with Jalen Reagor, who's a beast. But, I don't know. I didn't like the pick. I'm kind of glad he's there. It'll be interesting to see what they do with their playbook. But
I think it's a reach. I just don't think drafting a backup quarterback is as bad a thing as a lot of people make it out to be.
So I think the thing to me is that if Jalen Hurts should never start a game in the NFL. Like to me, Jalen Hurts does not have an NFL arm. The offense got substantially better once Lincoln Riley stopped letting him make decisions. Like he just does not have an NFL mindset. Now, the thing that I say about that though is that you talk about him as a Taysom Hill type player in Philadelphia. I think he's exactly that, right? Like he's somebody who obviously you can put in the game as a change of pace. You can line him up at running back. You can line him up at wide receiver. You can have him play some wildcat quarterback. But I just never want to see him do anything other than play wildcat quarterback. I don't want to see him throw the ball. I want to see him throw 10 times in his career like Taysom Hill. Like, he's just not somebody who, in my opinion, has the arm, has the accuracy, has the reliability, has consistency. Just to play quarterback at this level. And I think Oklahoma was as good as they were at times, despite what Jalen Hurts was doing.
It was really evident in the game against LSU, like that Jalen Hurts could not play quarterback at the same level as Burrow. Like it was just so obvious because there were people open. Like it's not like when people look at that and they're like, wow, they got blown out so bad. Like part of the reason is like they were actually winning a lot of matchups with receivers. They were not getting the ball to them.
Yeah, and it's funny because I think that you look at Oklahoma this year, and I think that take quarterback aside for all of the last 3 teams, I think that this was arguably the best team of the Lincoln Riley era. But then, you replace obviously 2 guys who were legit players, legit Heisman winners, number 1 overall draft pick.
Deserved number 1 pick.
Right. I think if Kyler Murray or Baker Mayfield is on this team, they don't get blown out by LSU. Like I think that it's a complete. Now they lose. LSU was that much better, but like Oklahoma backed its way into the college football playoff. If Kyler Murray or Baker Mayfield are on this team, I think that this team is as good as any team in the country, other than LSU.
Right. So I think with Jalen Hurts, you got someone that's got a great work ethic, and someone that's like has a nice leadership role. Like Dev said, Wentz has been injured like every season really, and especially during that towards the playoffs, that's when he gets injured. So he's probably gonna get a lot of time. So I'm happy for Jalen, but I didn't like that pick. Another thing I think I like during this draft is the teams helping their old quarterbacks. You've got the Bucks taking an offensive lineman, moving up to get Tristan Wirfs, which is a great player. You got him
1 pick.
You got him a new running back because Ronald Jones and Peyton Barber, that's not cutting it. Then you got with the Colts, you got Michael Pittman going, another receiver to put it alongside with T.Y. Hilton. And you also got Jonathan Taylor from Wisconsin. So new running game, nice some things going on there. Were there any other teams that you really thought wow, I'm surprised they did all this, or you really enjoyed or really hated the draft? Anyone that stood out?
There was one that stood out to me. I think the Packers, I understand that Aaron Rodgers is on the opposite side of age, but I think them taking quarterback 1st-round pick for them, I think it was number 1. I think they had a bunch of other needs to fill, given the fact that they're taking a quarterback. And also, I think Aaron Rodgers is going to play a little longer than we expect. So whether or not that quarterback is a good quarterback or solid quarterback or whatnot is besides my point. I just thought it was too soon for that pick. I think Packers have a lot of needs to fill. So that kind of shocked me, seeing that pick. And then the second thing is Jake Fromm fell very far. And I thought he could have been a better pick earlier on for some teams. So those 2 things kind of shocked me.
Yeah, I mean, you can imagine Rodgers can be happy that they took a quarterback with the 1st round. He's probably going to Favre him out and be like, fuck you, I'm not going to help you. And then you see that they didn't get any receivers. I think they got a tight end that. But yeah, overall, interesting by the Packers. What's up, Sean?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, right? Like everybody kind of talked about it afterwards, but this was the exact age that the Packers drafted Aaron Rodgers when Brett Favre was the age that Aaron Rodgers is now, right? So I think that he's 36 years old at this point, and like I think that we are starting to see some cracks enter his game. You know, I think that we are starting to see holes happen, and I mean, I don't know whether Jordan Love is going to be ready necessarily. I don't know whether Jordan Love is for sure going to be a good player. I think that his sophomore tape was fantastic. Like, he was a very accurate player. He has a great arm. He made great decisions. I mean, he was kind of the whole package as a sophomore. Really, really struggled this past year. If you're drafting him based on his 2018 tape, not his 2019 tape. But look, I mean, if you're the Packers, I think that, you know, they don't think I don't think that they get enough credit for being forward-looking with the whole Brett Favre situation and obviously drafting a guy that they liked. Now, I'm a little bit skeptical, obviously, that Jordan Love is Aaron Rodgers, but I do think that, you know what, you have to start creating a succession plan at some point, and if you feel like the guy that you like is there, I mean, might as well look at it.
I just assumed that he was probably number like 2 or 3 on their board for quarterbacks. So they were just surprised he was there, and they were like, "We got to go get him," because they thought like they must have seen something in him that they think he's going to be a star one day. If they're gonna go trade up to get him.
Yeah,
like,
well, and the thing that I'll say too is like, I think that Joe Burrow was just on another level than anybody else, right? And I think that Tua was on another level than anybody else in this draft too. And to me, I don't think that there's that huge gap between. I'm blanking on the Oregon kid's name. Justin Herbert. Yeah, Justin Herbert and Jordan Love. I don't think that there's that huge a difference between those two players in terms of kind of how I'd evaluate them as pros. Like, I would have Herbert first, like ahead of him, but not if you're gonna draft Herbert at 6. I mean, getting Jordan Love at 26 or whatever it was. I mean, I think that's pretty good value.
Yeah, and it's just I think the quarterbacks are just one of those things. Like, look, if everyone knew who the best quarterback was going to be going pro, like there wouldn't be like as much tension on. Like, we don't know, like no one knows, and it's always like a debate. I assume the Packers were way higher on Love than Herbert based off of the way they moved up.
Yeah, and I mean the thing is too, right, is like quarterback is always going to be fascinating, right? Because if you feel like you have a guy who you like, you should not wait, right? I mean, that's the funny thing about just all of this, right? And when you're evaluating quarterbacks, it's like if you think that Tua is the greatest thing ever, you need to make it happen. You need to go and get him. You know, I mean, that's the funny thing, obviously, and the absolutely goddamn bullshit thing, but like, you know, with Mitchell Trubisky, if they thought he was the guy, I have no problem with them going and getting him, because that's what you have to do with quarterbacks. You can't just wait for a guy to fall to you. You got to go and get him. So again, we'll see how good Jordan Love is. I think that there's plenty of reason to question whether he can play at this level, but I mean, if you think that he's gonna be good, I mean, commit to it.
Yeah, the Bears thing is interesting because like they really people really diss on them now, but at the time like Trubisky was like a lot of people thought he was the best quarterback in that draft. It wasn't just the Bears. Like,
yeah, the only issue with that is that anybody who had watched the 3 of them play could not conceivably say that he was better than those other.
I know, but it's like, it's just like that was just the way it was at the time. Trubisky had been rumored to go to the Bears for a long time. Like, the moving up is like, if you really like him, go get him. You know, like I wouldn't have even faulted Washington for taking Tua if they wanted him, take him. You know.
Yeah.
I mean, he's super talented, but I think at the same time, you see the Redskins, like, obviously just got Haskins, so they want to see what they got there. Just real quick, we'll just discuss. I think the Vikings also had an amazing draft. I think Cowboys and Vikings really jumped up in the Super Bowl betting odds. I think the Vikings had like 15 freaking picks. They were up there a lot. I think what you got there was Justin Jefferson. I think that was a nice pick. Since they traded away Stephon Diggs, they need another receiver right there with Thielen. They also got Jeff Gladney from TCU. So, you know, all my Horned Frogs out here. The Arizona Cardinals might have had the best offseason in my mind. I mean, you've got DeAndre Hopkins. You traded away David Johnson's bad contract. The running back they got from Miami, his name's slipping me real quick. Kenyon Drake. He was a beast when he came in and stepped in. And then you got Isaiah Simmons falling to you at pick number 8, and this guy's a stud on defense. He can do everything. I'm really excited to see the Cardinals now. I like the Bengals as well. Obviously, they got Burrow. Then they got T. Higgins. Some of that dropped quite a bit, I think, in my mind. So you got some stud receivers. You got the old A.J. Green, whatever he's got left. You've got Boyd, and now you've got T. Higgins right there, too. Another young quarterback that got a lot of help was the Broncos quarterback, Drew Lock. Last year, they took Noah Fant in the first round, stud tight end. You've got Cortland Sutton. And then who else do they match him with, Shahan?
They drafted Jerry Jeudy, right?
Jeudy with I think number 15 overall. So arguably maybe one of the best, like probably the best receiver out of this draft, or CD Lamb. And then they ended up getting KJ Hamler, who's like a speed demon. So they put him in the slot. That'll be very fun to watch.
Yeah.
What's up? Go ahead.
No. I mean, I was just gonna say. I mean, we obviously have to wait and see whether Drew Lock can kind of live up to that hype. I mean, I think that I have some questions about him, but I mean, this is when you're going to figure out what you have, right? Like, you're going to figure out what you have when you have Noah Fant, Jerry Jeudy, and KJ Hamler, obviously.
And Cortland Sutton, yeah. When you have that many studs, well, I mean, you got John Elway. He's the GM. He's obviously one of the greatest quarterbacks. He's thinking like a quarterback. He's like, I'm going to surround this guy with, all these amazing weapons. If he doesn't work out, I wouldn't be surprised for him to draft a lot more.
Actually, the other guy that they drafted too was, I'm going to butcher his name, but Albert Okwagana, whatever.
Yeah,
Albert,
that was it.
The tight end from Missouri. He actually won the Mackey Award in 2018 as the best tight end in college football. So, I mean, he's another guy who could step in right away, a big-time receiving threat. Didn't have the senior year that he hoped to have, but he's definitely a guy who's going to contribute for them.
Well, and the good part about that draft is, like, look, at the end of this year, they're probably going to know if Drew Lock's the guy or not. Like, because of the way they've constructed it, like, but they're going to know early. Yeah. So it's a good thing. Like,
yeah.
And I mean, right now, you still got quite a few free agents. I don't know if Winston has signed his deal yet, but you've got Cam Newton. You can always sign someone during the season, look to try to sign someone in free agency again next year or draft someone.
Yeah, and actually, two more guys that I really like from Denver's draft board. Justin Trinod is a guy from Wake Forest who people don't necessarily know. He's a linebacker, but he is a tackling machine. Like, he might have been the best linebacker in the Atlantic Coast Conference last year, like All-America type player. So we'll see whether physically he can translate to the next level, but I think he probably can. And with the fourth to last pick in the draft, they got Tyree Cleveland from Florida, and I remember watching this kid coming out of school in Texas. I mean, he was a big time receiver prospect. I think that he was I think that he was a borderline 5-star player, and Florida just never quite used him right. He got into trouble off the field, but he's one of those low risk, high reward players that I think that you get with the 252nd pick.
Right. And I mean, we can definitely discuss teams and players more later on. If you have any questions about who's drafted, any college football, please hit up Shahan at Shahan Jayaraja, my bad, on Twitter or Instagram. Like, this guy's a genius. He knows a lot of things. He does amazing work for Dave Campbell's Football. He's always jumping on podcasts. Just check him out. It's really amazing. If you love college football, Shahan is your guy. Lastly, I think I just want to quickly discuss why CD Lamb dropped real quick is 49ers taking Kinlaw. I really didn't expect. Everyone thought they might take Jeudy with that videotape of the coach, Shanahan, having that in the background. That was a surprising pick. And then Terrell going to the Falcons was a huge deal. And we're going to talk about, we already talked about the Eagles, what they did during this draft. They ended up having a pretty decent draft, getting some nice receivers. They also traded for Marquise Goodwin, who's a speed demon. So they got some really nice speed receivers because Jeffrey is pretty old and injury prone. And you got Deshaun Jackson, who's like a speed demon, but he's getting up there in age and missed half of last year. What's up, Ryan?
Hook 'em, Marquise.
Yeah, Marquise Goodwin's a Texas Longhorn.
Okay. I saw him at Chipotle. Good guy, awesome. Good guy. Shout out to Marquise Goodwin.
He probably had some stomach issues after eating at Chipotle.
Yeah, all right. I saw your tweets with Chipotle, Ashish.
I'm sick. We'll get into this later. I fucking hate Chipotle now. I was the biggest supporter throughout the whole time, but now,
dude, you gotta update the podcast listeners on your Chipotle experience.
We might have a rant I'll post later on. Okay, but real quick, I think nothing else really stood out in the first round. Is pretty common. I think the scary thing with the Redskins is that they took Chase Young. That defense line that they have is pretty fucking scary. You got Montez Sweat. You got Chase Young now, and they took those two Alabama defensive tackles, right, in the past few years. I'm forgetting.
Yeah, they did. Jonathan Allen and I can't remember who the other is, but yeah, I mean, when you talk about Chase Young, I mean, he's probably the best defensive line prospect to come out of the draft since Myles Garrett. Like that's the level that you're talking. He's a guy who grew a whole lot in college, like wasn't even expected to be 6'5" and could still be growing. Apparently his parents kept growing into their 20s. So he might not even be done growing as yet. So he was the sort of guy who stepped into that main pass rusher role, was supposed to replace Nick Bosa and didn't just replace Nick Bosa, but absolutely dominated that position. Ended up being, I believe, a Heisman finalist. So, I mean, he's a big time player.
Do you think he's going to make as big an impact as Bosa made last year? Because Bosa made his team significantly better last year. Do you think?
I think that it's always tough because, like, Bosa had the advantage of that. Obviously, they kind of just had that bullshit one bad season, right? Where they whatever 3-13 or whatever. Whereas I think that obviously Chase Young is stepping into a situation in Washington where he has to play a bigger role right away, right? Because Bosa was able to come into a unit that was already really, really good and make it elite. Whereas, Washington, I think, has a good unit, but, is he going to make it elite as yet? I don't know whether they're ready for
But
that.
he is in kind of the same spot where, like, Washington has been drafting a lot of D linemen, and San Francisco was in that spot too. They had been taking D linemen. So it really it helps them both in that kind of same way, right? Washington's is getting better, and same with San Francisco. Their line is good and young.
I mean, yeah, San Fran spent so many first round, second round picks on D linemen, and you can never have enough. If they turn out great, you just trade them. DeForest Buckner to the Colts, you got another first round pick, replace him with Kinlaw. So yeah, the other one was Deron Payne. Okay, so you got Riverboat Ron Rivera, new head coach for the Redskins. Let's see what they do. He's very defensive minded. We saw with the Panthers, and they've got some really good talent to work with. Just real quickly.
and the other, the thing with him too is I don't think that you can underestimate the difference in coaching ability between Jay Gruden and Ron Rivera. That is a gulf, right? You're going from an incompetent organization to, obviously the organization we can still talk about, but coaching staff wise, I mean, Ron Rivera has been a very good coach for many years in this league. And I think that that's definitely something to worry about.
For sure. And lastly, we'll just talk about the Giants real quick. They took Andrew Thomas with the 4th pick overall. Lately, you can see them that they're investing in their O-line. Eli didn't really have a lot of help throughout his career, and he got, you saw him get hit really badly. So I think they just want to protect their quarterback, and they'll help out Saquon in the pass game for sure. And in the second round, they took Xavier McKinney, who was someone I really loved and thought the Cowboys could take with the first-round pick. Overall, I'm not too scared about the Giants. I think Daniel Jones is really good. We saw last year. The NFC East is definitely packed. I think with this draft, the Cowboys are right there with the Eagles right now. Redskins probably need to work on their offense, see what Haskins is. His running game needs a lot of work because Adrian Peterson's old. Guys have been 2 years in a row. Probably need some receiver help as well. Overall, I think really fun draft. We can definitely talk about this more in the future. If you have any questions, hit us up. We'd love it. Ashish Airy at Supaleza for Dev, at Shahan Jayaraja for Shahan. And with that said, we're just going to wrap up this episode. Another amazing one, very long one. I loved it, every bit of it. So like I said, if you have any college questions for sure, Shahan is your man. Please check out his work. He dropped the magazine last year for Dave Campbell's Football. He had the head story. He has a lot of shitty, he's a shit ton of stories, and he's always jumping on podcasts.
And I've got the main feature again this year, but we haven't revealed it as yet, but I do have it.
Wow, alert. All right, guys, alert. He has the cover story again, top story. He does a lot of work. He knows everything. So please hit him up, ask him questions. You'll definitely get your answer. So thanks again for tuning in. I know it was a very long episode this time, but I appreciate all the support. If you have any questions, segment ideas, you can always hit us up at ashishandfriends.com, on Instagram at ashishandfriends, and on Twitter at ashishandpals. We're on Facebook now, facebook.com/ashishandfriendspod. So thank you again once again, and until next time, we're out.